A very good evening, everyone. It's time to begin our Fireside chat. I would like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Ali Hussein, CEO, Eros Now. Mr. Hussein has more than 15 years of experience in the media and digital industry. He has been an entrepreneur and served as a board advisor to Discovery Networks. Prior to his association with Eros Now, he has held various leadership positions in companies such as Google, Hungama, and Viacom 18. Welcome, sir. And now to welcome our speaker, Mr. Mayur Bhinjiani, co-founder and studio head at Hypernova Interactive. Hypernova is a creative game development powerhouse that has made over 50 games with various partners over the past 5 years. The 40-member venture-funded game studio has seen their games played by millions of users from all over the world, especially in the USA and India. The studio is charting a new path by betting on the growing Indian games market. I would request all the delegates to keep posting their questions in the chat box, and the panel will address a selected few at the end of the session. Over to you, Mr. Hussain.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank IMAI for putting up fantastic events across the internet and the digital mediums through the course of the year. It's been a difficult year for all of us, a new year for all of us. So we thank IMAI for continuing the kind of momentum that they have to make sure that these knowledge sharing sessions kind of continue. Today, I'm personally going to go a little off topic of my traditional trajectory, and we're going to do a very interesting session with Mayur. For amongst the few times, I'm not going to be the receiving end of the questions. So I'm going to be posing the questions and then hopefully getting a lot of insights and guidance also from colleagues like Mayur who've been in the business for some time now. Before I get started, I think it'll be great, Mayur, for you to maybe take a few minutes, just talk to us about your background, talk to us about how this company started, talk to us about, at a high level, what is it that Hypernova Interactive does. So over to you, Mayur.
Sure. Yeah. Similarly, same as Ali, I'd like to thank, IMAI Kato for this awesome event. The games industry definitely needs, a more organized effort for people to interact with each other, share knowledge, and grow the pie for everybody else. So I've been running a game studio in Bangalore called Hypernova Interactive for the past, 5 years. We, in fact, just last month completed our 5-year anniversary, so it was quite a milestone for us. I started it, with a very old friend of mine, Zefa. I actually met him in a gaming cafe, true story. And that's how the whole, friendship began. We went our different ways. I went on to, Zynga, who had set up a, studio here in Bangalore. I was leading some of their games like Farmville, Castleville, back in the web browser eras, where those were like massive hits with like 100 million users. So it was quite an experience, a big learning experience for us, because at that point in India, barely we had any studios at all whatsoever. So Zynga was sort of my university to get a lot of knowledge and get an opportunity to work with some very wonderful people from India and from outside India. And Huzafa went on, to do a bunch of things on his own, and we started somewhere in 2015. The idea was to always make some larger than life games for the mobile audience, because that's where we saw the future was. I think Josefa told me when he saw the first iPad ever launched that, hey, Mayur, this is the future and this is where everybody's going to start moving to. So Hypernova has been quite a journey for us. We've released a few games, quite a few games actually. Just last week we launched one new game on MPL. So we've been at it for quite a while, trying to make some exciting games. And entire focus for us right now is looking at how India is growing and how that market is becoming very exciting for everyone.
Cool, that's fantastic. Mayur, you want to quickly talk to us about, and this is an area I've been personally also kind of researching for a while, right? The gaming market in India specifically, and when you kind of divide it, and it's incorrect to divide it, but if you divide it broadly into, say, the casual, mid-core, and the AAA gaming space, right? What do you believe, and this will make sense when we kind of finish our discussion also, but what do you believe currently the market's at in terms of what's the difference? So at two pivots, right? One pivot being what's the kind of profile of the casual gamer versus what's the profile of the mid-core to the AAA gamer. And then the second kind of deviation that I'm asking for is that how do you believe that there is going to be a drastic change on the consumer side of things? Is there any
Right.
trends that you're observing based on your experience with
Right.
Hypernova or with your colleagues in the business that you're seeing there are massive trends in the consumer? So the basic premise of the question is, who is the consumer today across these segments, and what do you believe will be the top three changes that might come about in the next 5 years?
Right. So a couple of things we have to understand specifically around the consumer here in India, right? So India is an open market, unlike China, right? Like, so China is a walled garden. If you want to publish some games, some content there, you have to go through a local partner. Whereas India, it's even the local developers here are fighting the best possible developers. You're fighting Supercell, Tencent, all of these big guys. So the Indian audience is very mature. It has access to all sorts of global content on Netflix, Prime Video, Hotstar, etc. So there is that audience, right? Like, so that's a very different India, right? That's the largely mostly in English speaking, India. So one of the things we try to tell internally in our studio as well, that there is not just one India, there are many Indias. And that's one of the big learnings we've had, where when you try to paint a product broadly for everybody in India, it becomes very difficult to sell it to everybody. So you have to identify, okay, I have a Hindi Bollywood movie, so I'm going to make it for Hindi speaking people, right? Like, so similarly, uh, that's the kind of mindset we want to try and bring to games here as well, where you specifically see and decide what kind of India you want to go after, right? Because there is a huge chunk which is, in fact, India has the largest English speaking population, right? Like, so there's a huge chunk of people that are open to all of these global games and global IPs, and that are also your sort of the high spending consumer who has that extra disposable income to be able to have this life in a virtual world in games. But for the other India, right, the trend that we've seen entirely around real money gaming, they don't really see the virtual games business, or rather owning virtual goods, as something that's worthwhile to spend money on. That's why real money gaming is doing so well in that category, because that makes very clear sense for them. Okay, I'm putting in 5 rupees, I could possibly make 8 rupees back. And that's why that whole segment has sort of boomed with investments in MPL, Dream 11, and a whole bunch of other studios that you've seen in the space. But I think uh, right now the category that's open, and that there are consumers that still needs to be served, and that's very underserved, is where there's a lack of local stories for the users in India. So I think that's the market that's open really for taking, because you have the AAA guys like PUBG and Firescore from Garena. Sorry, not Firescore, Free Fire from Garena. That's doing like phenomenally well in the country, right? And you have some great local casual hits as well in the non-real money gaming space that are doing really well. But we haven't really seen sort of a big budget game, big budget IP that can, even close to be a rival of something like PUBG. So if you're talking about who really is the consumer, there are at least three tiers, or at least three key personalities that we try to look after. The English speaking India, where you make them, that audience holds you to a global standard. And then there's the tier two India, where maybe they speak a little bit of English, but not really that much. They would prefer generally the content in their local language, right? And then there's the third India, which has very low end phones, and currently clearly does not understand the value of what owning a virtual item would be, as a benefit for them. So that becomes really hard for you to sort of sell virtual goods like guns or even avatars in a game, which has become the norm in terms of monetizing the games. So only ad monetization sort of becomes your avenue for as a games business to go after that audience. So that's how I would split that up.
Got it. So there's an interesting point that you raised, right? So I'm saying that you're dividing India into three, right? The India we live in, the India we know, and the India we don't know, right? So you're kind of
Right,
dividing it into three sectors, and that's relevant for a lot of kind of, I would say, across different content businesses. But when you look at games in specific, right, there is no real language barrier when it comes to games.
right,
We've been used to playing, for example, historically back like Tekken Tag or lots of different other games which really didn't have a language barrier per se to play a particular game. So, do you actually believe? And I want to maybe spend some time on this understanding in terms of what a localized strategy for a game is. So this again, sorry, I'm kind
right.
of playing around with a couple of questions, and we might spend a couple minutes on this, right?
Sure.
One is, what a localized strategy for a game is. That, like, does it even make sense to have a localized strategy for game? That's one. And the second is, is it possible for you to garner audiences outside of India? So even though it's a local game, but it could be a global theme, right? So stories or backdrops are not limited to just the context of India. As a story is a story, right?
Right,
Would it then have global appeal? So let's think about it in terms of, is there efficacy from a model perspective? Because mid-core to AAA games, I'm not specifically talking about the casual segment, are the relatively expensive affairs from the
right,
investment that goes into the entire game creation into the entire life cycle of the game, right? Or
correct,
the life cycle of the gaming experience. So, when you look up that segment in specific, do you really believe that even in the future there will be an opportunity? Because, as you said, India is an open market. More games will be developed by the West or different parts of the world, which will always get an
correct.
opportunity to have kind of a platform for distribution in India. So, does localized games really play a key role in terms of penetration of consumer behavior for gaming in, say, tier 2, tier 3 markets? And if yes or if not, irrespective, what's the independent strategy for Indian game developers to get a pie of the global audience?
Right. So I think there are two parts to the question. One is, trying to address can Indian developers specifically go after India and what kind of an India they should go after, right? And then can Indian audience get a piece of the global? Can the Indian developer also get a piece of the global pie, right? So to address these two questions, we have to basically break down the entire gaming business into three segments. One is, like you clearly mentioned, one is just the development bit, right? Second is the outreach or the marketing, right? And third is then finally the live ops, where you monetize the game, or you're able to basically make money from the game, in simple words. And are you able to do that effectively, right? So in India, most of the developers that I've seen that have found some success have focused a lot on the other two aspects a lot more, where they have very efficient distribution models and monetization models. Even though the production value of the games might not be very high, or it's more like an app. Like, say for example, some of the top charts games that you can look at right now that are made by some of the local developers. Just Ludo hai, then there is Teen Patti. Obviously, Ludo has a whole bunch of inherently viral features where the game grows on its own. Uh, but a lot of them have been able to, really be able to deliver a great distribution model and a good monetization model. One of the things that we are yet to see crack is where can we have great development combined with great distribution as well as very effective monetization come out of India. And that's where I really see the next big ticket item for whoever is out there to take it.
So you're saying it's a combination of great development with great distribution and great monetization, right? It's almost
Correct.
like I'm also dreaming at the same time. So, give me like an ideal case of like what did that be like a great quality game development which has
Right.
capability to kind of not only distribute in India but around the world.
Right.
Monetization is kind of more intrinsic to the gameplay, right? It depends whether you're going in for a subscription model or a
Correct.
freemium model. So it's kind of more intrinsic to how you design the customer journey over there. So I'm assuming that if you create the market, I'm guessing the monetization will come.
Yeah, so but it's a very difficult thing to create a new market from the ground up.
Correct.
And the thing is, there are even inside the games industry, there is a whole different way of being able to monetize your users. Like we have stuff like hyper casual, where the amount of money you are going to make from a user, that's measured for roughly 3 days. That's it, right? Like that's all you are expecting the shelf life of your product to be. Key, once the user has installed this game, how much effective money I am making from the user back within 3 days, versus you'll have some of the massive games uh, elsewhere. But even in all of this, I think the big challenge then becomes how are you able to effectively, manage. Now, I'm just going to go into some, product management jargon. How do you manage the lifetime value of the user versus the cost per install? Right? In simple language, basically what that means is within a given amount of time, how much overall money can I make from a user once he downloads and installs the app, versus how much does it cost me to get that user. So here the key thing that really helps drive down the cost per install is how original and great your content is, because sometimes the game mechanics transcend boundaries. So that's where you also are at a disadvantage against global developers, because the kind of games you are making here, as a, let's say if you're a new business in India, and you want to try and build out something, what should be your new product, right? So if you try and target the global audience immediately at that moment, even if you might be great at producing the games, or you first need to figure out the distribution part, right? So, but even if you first have the great content, there you are still fighting the best developers elsewhere,
Sure.
right? So it sort of becomes case to case basis. As a business, you'll have to decide, where do my strengths really lie? Because I try to believe in a very interesting quote by Justin Khan, who was the founder of Twitch. He says, first time founders focus on the product, and second time founders focus on the distribution. So, which piece have you figured out first? And like, what are your strengths as a business that really impact that decision? So, for us, as example, our strength is big content. So that's why we've sort of stayed away from trying to figure out marketing and distribution. So for that, we tend to work with partners. So like I said, so there are different pieces of business, similar to the movie business, right? Like you might have just a production house, and then there's a distribution house. So I think we haven't had enough specialization of businesses also in India enough for that ecosystem to bloom, basically.
Got it. So I think I'm reading that it's slightly at a premature stage. I won't say at an immature stage, but at a premature
Correct.
stage, and we believe that there is enough amount of, and I'm going to use a word loosely called enthusiasm, keeping it slightly more open-ended in that context about the business at large. That we're going to see several kind of entities and companies based on skill set kind of start investing about what their play in the so-called kind of gaming business is going to be.
Correct.
There might be capabilities coming on the production side or the studio side. There'll be capability coming in the distribution side or the marketing side. And then obviously there's a capability on the consumer side that'll come up that'll potentially kind of look at how this ecosystem gets brewed. So the message that I'm getting is that it's definitely a massive opportunity for all stakeholders to kind of consider. It's just identifying what your core strengths are and building along those lines would be preferential as a good kind of start point.
Correct. So I mean, it's obvious, right? Like India is the biggest, download in terms of number of apps for Play Store worldwide right now. So uh, the opportunity is obviously there, huge, right? Like the only issue that generally people look at is okay, Indian users don't give us enough money in the
Sure.
games industry. That's sort of the general gripe I hear from everybody else, right? But the point there also is that you have to cultivate those users,
Sure.
right? They are not just inherently going to follow your game because you are performing in a specific other territory.
Sure.
So in that way, India is a little different for quite a few people who are looking to enter it from an external perspective as well.
Sure. Let's change track a little bit, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but spend a few minutes. Let's talk about talent in terms of game development talent or studio talent, right?
Right.
Again, an aspect of education being provided to the right set of colleagues at the right stage is an aspect of what's the overall business opportunity. Now, this might not be a relevant question maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line, but on the early side of any business, as we call, right, um, there would be a certain question in terms of the overall capability across skill sets in the country to develop high quality games. So
Right.
again, I'm not referencing so much to casual games, but more going in the mid-core to AAA space, purely because the cumulative experience doesn't exist to be able to do this caliber of work
Correct.
at scale, right? And I know
Correct.
there are bits and pieces of indie games being developed in that space, but at scale there isn't much that's currently going on. So my
Exactly.
question to you is that when you're looking at developing high quality games, how do you source talent, or do you believe India has good potential talent or good talent that can contribute, or what should we be doing as an ecosystem to
Right.
kind of incubate great talent? Any suggestions, recommendations for the larger world?
Right. So I think India has some amazing technical talent. What I mean by that is not just in the programming or the development side of things, but also in terms of art, that we have great technical artists in the sense they can produce stuff very effectively, nicely. But we still have a scarcity of creative people overall in the industry in the sense we have a lack of game designers. So a game designer is basically like a director for a movie, right? Like Hindi में कहेंगे तो सूत्रधार, somebody who holds the thread together for the entire project, working with sound people, artists, animators, programmers, the schedulers, the budgeting guys, the quality analysis guys. So there is, I think, still a big scarcity of people who can bring all of these things together. We have a lot of great individual talent in specific verticals, like I mentioned, technical talent. That great 3D production is there, great 2D production skills are there, great animation skills, VFX skills, and I think with Epic announcing a bunch of stuff in this event as well, I think the game technology stack is going to enter into the movie production and TV production space very soon. Uh, and we have great talent for that as well, I think, because we've seen a lot of democratization of skills in the past 5 years, where with the marketplaces becoming available in Unity, Epic, there's a lot of ease of things in terms of being able to make a basic game from the ground up. I remember the back of heydays, about 15 years ago, where it would be very difficult to just make a simple platform game. It would take you a year to do that. Yeah, but it's now very easy. You get stuff like this just right out of the box. So there's been definitely a lot of democratization of the talent, but I still think we have some amount of good business talent as well, but we haven't had enough just companies in the ecosystem for the talent to bloom. Like for example, in Zynga, uh, led to actually, apart from our own studio, it led to some of the Zynga alumni have founded some amazing companies like Play Simple Games, this Moonfrog, and I think there's a few other companies also that Zynga alumni. There's a board game company. So I don't think we've had enough of these companies to get the mushrooming talent across different cities where people can come together and make use of all this technical talent available. So I think those are the two areas I think where we are lacking, where there's lack of enough investment and there's lack of enough creative talent that can bring all the technical talent we have across the board together.
Understood. Just a quick shout out to all the delegates that are online. We're getting some very good questions, and I think I'd encourage you guys to kind of leverage this format, throw as many questions on. We're a fairly kind of a 30-minute schedule. I'll maybe kind of ask one or two more questions and then maybe jump on to some of the questions that have come about.
Right.
I apologize that we've not been going to be able to answer all your questions, but I'll pick up one or two at least from the audience just to make sure that we get a chance to kind of answer those. But we can potentially try and send answers to colleagues later. So maybe just two more questions from my side before I jump into audience question. One is, we've heard this thing in 2018, 19, more 2019 actually come about, with the concept of cloud gaming, right? So
Right.
that then adds another dynamic to the gaming world, because The simple premise behind cloud gaming, as I think about it, taking away the complications, is high fidelity graphics being rendered on your device to be able to play console level gaming on your device, right?
Correct.
Now, if you picture that across or paint that across a global footprint, one of the number two markets from a growth perspective would be India, right? So
Right.
automatically you would assume that if there are fabulous console games like Destiny or Halo or whatever, some of the best games that we played, you would
Correct.
think that, some of these experiences, even on a 90%, 95%, with some generation loss, if that's any, through the rendering that come through, that experience on the device will be phenomenal experiences for gaming for the end users. So that further adds a chink in the wheel as far as a lot of the Indian developers are concerned, because you now have high quality consoles being able to render on the thing. But what is kind of cloud gaming kind of short term to long term opportunity, and is this a play? How do we use it as India as a country, or the developers as a country, for our advantage?
Right. So I think there are two pieces where cloud gaming is really going to impact. I think in the short term, one very important piece that all of the big service providers need to solve is of input latency. In simple terms, what that means is how much time does it take for me to press a button and see the reaction of the character on my screen, right? At scale, are we able to solve that effectively? Because for games, that's one of the most important things. Right? Games provide consumers agency, where I can be somebody else inside the game. I can be a hero, a fighter, a soldier, anybody else. So it's paramount for all of the big businesses that are looking to scale to sort of solve input latency, which we are yet to see a very good solution at scale working very effectively. Uh, it's only available in certain pockets with very uh, high speed connections, LAN connection. So uh, we are yet to see how it pans out in the short term. But in the long term, I think with the advent of 5G in a 5 year cycle, definitely cloud gaming is going to change the landscape for everybody, because we are all going to move uh, from a download and play model to pick up and play anytime you want, anytime you wear, share control with somebody else during cloud gaming. Um, all sorts of use cases are going to be possible with cloud gaming, basically, right? And the other thing it'll do is it'll blur the line between your small device.
Mayur, I think
And we
there's
lost
some
Mayur.
there's some bandwidth issue at his end. I would just request you, Mayur, to please turn off your video so that the audio is not interrupted. While he connects back, Mr. Hussain, would you have some insights on any of the questions that are so?
Yeah, so I can take a couple of questions while Mayur kind of jumps back on, right? So let me try and take. What are three things? This is a very interesting question. What are three things you think game developers should keep in mind while developing games in India? So I think the first thing is clearly kind of identifying in terms of who the consumer set is, in terms of you developing the game for, kind of doing a complete identification of what the market opportunity is, what are the similar games that exist in that space. So a very clear understanding in terms of the kind of journey that you would want the gamer to go through. So I think people don't spend enough time on that particular part of the business, but I think that's a very important kind of aspect of very clear identification, or even market research of understanding of why you want to develop the game and how do you kind of develop a game specifically for a consumer set. The
I
second
think I got,
question,
sorry, I think I got disconnected. You
yeah,
go
no
ahead,
worries,
Rajesh.
man. The second, so Mayur, I'm just answering one of the consumer questions quickly. The second one was thinking about in terms of, and this is what Mayur was also saying, was kind of identifying your core skill set, depending on whether it's distribution, publishing, or it is more in terms of product development. So clearly identifying the product. I think that's an area where people need to spend a lot of time. understanding in terms of how do you build a game that has a certain amount of immersive experience that's built, right? Because this is not a touch and go experience. You want the consumer to come and spend hours with the product. So
Correct.
the expectation being the highest, that's the second aspect that's very important for game developers in India. And I think the third is, and I'm saying this again, the third could be multiple facets, but the third is looking at how you're able to get distribution going for the product, right? Because you want to make sure that extensive sampling is available. So at some part of the journey in the development cycle, kind of identify what you believe would be the right publishing or distribution strategy. I'm also conscious that we're running out of time, so I want to allow Mayur to maybe get in the last couple of minutes because he was dropped off. Sorry we couldn't answer your questions, but Mayur, you want to just quickly kind of finish your statement, or if there's any closing statements you'd like to make.
Right. So I've had a chance to interact fortunately with Ali before. It's a fantastic. Hello. I mean,
Mayur, your audio is kind of dropping in and out here.
right.
Okay, no worries. So Mayur, let's log off. We appreciate, because we're almost at the end of the session. So I'm just going to say thank you for everyone for being a part of this. Hopefully this was helpful, useful. We wish Mayur and Hypernova Interactive the very best. And thank you for listening to us, and have a fabulous evening.
Thank you so much to both our speakers for being with us today and engaging in such an interesting conversation. I would also like to thank our associate partners, VRAR Association, and knowledge partners, RedSeer. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Mayur.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys.